So, what were your initial impressions of the atmosphere at Camden Yards on opening day, and how would you say that compared to your expectations?
Can I stop you guys for 1
Sure.
second? And I won't be doing this again.
Sure.
Start with asking him for his name and ID.
Yes.
Smart. Okay.
I was surprised he didn't ask that, to be honest with you.
Well, there you go. What is your name and your ID?
Paul Zwaska, Orioles head groundskeeper.
Awesome.
Former Orioles head groundskeeper.
What were your initial impressions of the atmosphere at Camden Yards on opening day, and how did that compare to your expectations?
I would say it was exactly what I expected, to be honest with you, because I mean, as everybody was, we were just super excited with this place, and we couldn't wait to show it off to people, and we knew it was going to be a huge hit. From very early on, you know, being able to take a ballpark and make it look old, but be totally new with all the latest comforts, that was pretty spectacular and unheard of, you know, before then. So we were all very excited, and we just knew that there was going to be a huge reaction to it.
So what were those expectations going into opening day? What was your vision as the head groundskeeper that had direct control over this? What were you looking for?
That's a darn good question. What were my direct expectations? You know, just hoping and praying that the field looked absolutely beautiful for the very start. There was a lot of pressure to have a perfect field at that time, and we worked very hard on that. And the weather wasn't cooperating at first, but came around in the last week or so beforehand. I was getting a lot of pressure from upstairs to make sure that the field looked great. And so, you know, once I had the field dialed in, I knew the rest was going to be pretty easy, because I mean, we've done it before. We've put a ball game on a million times before. That wasn't the issue. The issue was how polished was the ballpark going to be. Certainly, you know, construction wasn't done yet. It was, you know, from the fans' point of view, it was finished. But there were a lot of things that were still going on, even up to, and I think even during the ball game, they were still working in the ballpark. But most of it, if not all of it, wasn't even noticed by the fans.
Okay, and obviously a game like opening day, this is one of the biggest games you've probably ever worked in your life. How does that atmosphere and that environment compare to regular season games, just playoff games, compared to this big game?
Yeah. Well, opening day every year is probably the most exciting day, because you've been, you know, at that point, the ground crew has been working on the field for 4 to 6 weeks trying to get the place ready to go. So you're always jacked up. But then to add on to it that you're in this brand new, revolutionary new design of a ballpark, and what we knew it was going to do with the fans, you know, the reaction that they were going to give. I mean, everybody was fully jacked. I mean, they were excited.
You mentioned weather a couple minutes ago.
Yeah.
What were the conditions like leading up to it? Were you monitoring the forecast, and then how did the weather
Well,
that day?
when you're a groundskeeper, you're always thinking about the weather. I still think about the weather, you know, even though I'm out of the business. Yeah, it was. I remember it being, you know, a colder than normal spring at that time, and so we were having problems getting the grass to green up. And the varieties of grass that we had in the turf to begin with were not your typical early green up grasses. But I mean, we were pumping fertilizer and things to it to get it to jump, and it finally jumped about a week beforehand. The weather for the day was beautiful. It was a sunny day, and you know, the best part about the whole day was the game was under 2 hours. You know, we didn't get a lot of those back in those days, you know. But and probably for the fans, that was kind of a bad thing, because you know, when they got into that park, I guarantee you they wanted to spend 5 hours in there, just because of you know, all the neat things that they could see that was so different from Old Memorial Stadium.
So what would you say was, I mean, obviously the weather was great, it sounded like it went well. What was that thing that big hold up, if anything, the biggest challenge you faced?
The biggest challenge was getting the field to green up. Definitely, that was probably the most pressing thing on my mind, just from the pressure I was getting.
Okay. Let's run through your schedule a little bit, both the night before, the day of, hour to hour. What did it look like?
Well, I mean, by the night before, we were pretty much ready to go. We obviously there was a huge media presence because it had been telegraphed everywhere to the media that this was going to be something different. And I forget, I think all of the major networks morning, their big morning shows, Good Morning America, Today, and all that, were here for that for that morning. In fact, one of them I think was telecasting their entire show from at the park. So that means for us, we got to get in here extra early, because with the heightened media, there are things that we have to do to the field to get things ready to go. And as time goes on, more and more media creep into the areas where we have to work. So to get out of there, or not to get out of their way, but for us to get our stuff done when they're not in our way, we had to get in here earlier. If I recall, we were in at 6 o'clock that day, which is probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours earlier than normal for us. It wasn't one of those where we slept here overnight. We saved that kind of stuff for the Pope.
And you mentioned it was being marketed as something different.
Yeah.
Was that your mindset going into it? Like, I want to create an atmosphere that's something different for the fans compared to what they normally experience?
I don't know if I'd say it was my idea or my goal. Well, I guess I would say, yeah, it was my goal. But it was the club's goal in general. The original plan for this park, when HOK came in with the original drawings, it was just another one of your typical flying saucers being set down in the middle of Baltimore City. And it was the Orioles that said, no, we'll show you how to build a ballpark. And Janet Marie and Larry Lucchino and the rest of the gang took over, and with input from everybody in the club, we changed how ball fields, or ballparks, I should say, were designed and created.
Okay. In terms of your grounds crew, did you have to train this team differently? How much turnover was there between the crew that you had at Memorial Stadium and what you had?
Yeah, there was no changeover at all. My full-time crew, which was a crew of 7, those are the guys who did all the work on the field. They were a pretty steady group year in and year out. What changed for us was at the old ballpark, we were dealing with a native soil field, which didn't drain well, heavy soils, compacted, hard, just wasn't easy to maintain from a certain degree as far as rain and drainage was concerned. Here, we moved over to a sand-based field that also had a vacuum system to literally pull water through the soil, through the sand base, and allow that field to drain much quicker. There was certainly a sharp learning curve for me. And this was at a time in the 80s and 90s where a lot of ballparks were being built. We were going through a transition in baseball of a lot of old parks were fading away. You're seeing the end of the stadiums that housed both baseball and football, and you were getting baseball only and football only stadiums. And at the same time, we were upgrading technology into these sand-based fields. And all of us groundskeepers who had worked all of our lives on native soil fields, it was a very humbling experience then to move to a sand-based field, because sand is a very unforgiving medium to grow things in. It's a very sterile environment, unlike a native soil field, which has a lot of soil microbes in it and things like that, living organisms that help you manage the system. Sand is very sterile. And because of that, your window for air, is like that far open, whereas on a native soil field, you've got a huge margin for air. So that was the tricky part, especially the first season, was getting a handle on fertility and watering and disease control and all those kind of things. And every one of us went through that problem. Every one of us in Major League Baseball who went from native soil to a sand-based system. And everybody got humbled some way or another. So that was the huge change for us.
Was opening day in 1992 your first time working with the sand-based field?
Well, I'd been working with it for a month and a half in preparation for opening day, but as far as growing conditions are concerned, because you were just getting into the growing season at that time, you could say, yeah, that was our first situation.
So I would assume there was a learning curve with that. The process was slowed down that morning a little bit compared to what...
No, because when you have a game that's a day game, typically you'll get a lot of your work done the night before, so that when you come in the morning, there's not as much to do. And of course, for opening day, you absolutely do that because there's going to be a lot of flurry of activity with media that you get as much done up to the last minute stuff as possible. And with this event being as big as it was, and all the media attention that was going to be here, and we knew about it ahead of time, of course, because we were being told about it. You pretty much get all your work done the day before, and the rest of your day is, we probably, if I recall, we mowed just to freshen up the pattern and keep it nice and brilliant. And the dirt work was all done with the exception of just maintaining water at that time. So from that kind of angle, excuse me, all that work was done. A lot of our time on opening day is spent, dealing with where can the press go, where can they not go, all that kind of thing.
Okay. Is there any specific message you said to your team on opening day when you got there before everything started?
You're late. No, it wasn't that. No, not really. It was pretty much just have fun and take it all in.
Okay. In a Baltimore Sun article, you said that you noticed trash flying around in the Friday exhibition game, and you said you'd be vigilant about that on opening day. Was that a problem on opening day? No,
it didn't end up being as windy. And this is a typical problem with ballparks a lot of times. After a game ends, usually when you've got everybody sitting in the stands, they've all got their legs down and they throw their trash under their legs, and that kind of holds it. But then as soon as the game ends and they get up, poof, the trash starts blowing around if you've got any kind of decent wind. We didn't have that, fortunately, that I recall, for opening day. There might have been a couple pieces of trash that blew around, but nothing horrendous.
Okay. How did you do with the pregame ceremonies? Were you involved with planning? Were you concerned about what was going on?
Oh yeah, I mean, if it goes on the field, it's usually, we're involved in the planning and timing and all that good stuff. But I mean, our biggest thing was rolling out this massive orange carpet for the introductions from center field.
Okay. Is there a specific moment from opening day that you consider your biggest triumph? Or did you go home that day thinking, this is what I accomplished?
Well, I would, in my opinion, the biggest accomplishment was that we pulled off a spectacular opener in a brand new ballpark. If you go back a month before opening day and you walked into that ballpark, I remember us as the crew looking around going, there is no way in hell we're going to have this place ready. I mean, I think the bulk of, I can't remember if it was the upper deck or the lower deck, seating wasn't in yet and things like that. And we're thinking to ourselves, how is this going to get done? Are we going to be ready by opening day? But, then magically people come out of the woodwork to come and get the work done. And we pull off a spectacular opening game. We won. It was a fast game. I mean, everything clicked.
Would you say that, what mistakes do you think that you made at Memorial Stadium that you tried to fix at Camden Yards? What did you try to do differently?
Well, I mean, the big thing we tried to do differently was just the entire construction of the ball field, something that would drain better and allow us to play games in a safer situation than what we might have had at Memorial Stadium whenever we had rain games there. That was the biggest challenge that we put up to ourselves, and I would say, for the most part, we succeeded in that. Obviously, if it's If it's pouring rain, you're not going to play, no matter how good the system, unless you have a roof on it. But if you can recuperate much faster and make the field playing surface safer immediately after rain, which the sand-based system did for us, that was the huge change for us.
Okay. Could you run me through what actually happened on that day, on opening day morning, from 6 a.m., which I think that's when you said you got there.
Yeah.
To,
Yeah. Boy, you're really challenging my memory. I mean, I do remember coming in at 6. Didn't get a lot of sleep the night before because obviously you're excited. And like I said, we got most of the work done as quickly as we could, knowing that media was going to be increasing rapidly. And like I said, we did have one of the major networks here doing their morning show live. So we had to kind of work around all that. So we wanted to get our mowing out of the way as quickly as possible. Like I said, everything else was ready to go. We pulled off the home plate and mound tarps. We got the batting cage down behind home plate because we knew if we waited, it was just going to be a nightmare trying to get through all the people. So we got those kind of difficult things out of the way. Anything that dealt with having to, get around media and all the dignitaries that were there, that was our biggest obstacle for us getting anything done. But aside from that, once we got that stuff done, again, because we had done all of our preparation work the day before, it was pretty much cruise control. Obviously I had quite a few interviews to do that day, but the crew was pretty relaxed. I don't remember us being tense at all. I would say we were more excited than we were tense.
and how did you manage dealing with the media, all these interviews and cameras flying around? You had a job to do.
It's part of your job. I mean, to be honest with you, it's part of your job. But I was excited as the rest of them were to get this place rocking and rolling. Like I say, every opening day you're always excited, but this was probably double the intensity because of the new ballpark. I grew up. Wrigley Field was my inspiration to become a groundskeeper. The brick, the brick ballpark, the ivy covered walls, the old style ballpark. That's what excited me about this ballpark, was it reminded me of walking into Wrigley a lot of times because it had that old style feel. That's what I loved about being a groundskeeper in Major League Baseball.
So what did you see in Camden Yards then that reminded you of Wrigley Field?
Well, in Wrigley, certainly, we put in ivy. Originally, when we had the batter's eye wall, we were still, in the planning stages at Memorial Stadium. And I went up to Janet Marie Smith's office one day and I said to her, we have got this great big batter's eye wall in center field, and you're just going to leave that sit there like that? I said, why don't we put ivy up on there? And she goes, well, that's a good idea. We could do that. That'd be a salute to Wrigley. I said, exactly. And so we decided to put up ivy. Now, we didn't use the same type of ivy as they did. They use a Boston ivy, which is more of a deciduous ivy that drops its leaves. So like when you look at opening day and in the early games at Wrigley, it's just the vines, you don't see the leaves. And then as the growing season goes on, you get the leaves and everything. So I decided to put in English ivy out here. Well, we struggled with that, obviously. The ivy went up, but it struggled with the southern exposure. So that was kind of a throwback to the old ballparks. But there were a lot of instances of things that Janet and Larry and everybody else came up with to put in this ballpark, as a nod to the old ballparks. They studied pictures of all kinds of different ballparks. They went and visited a lot of old ballparks. And, they picked out the things that, hey, we could work this into our ballpark. So you get the feel that it was an old ballpark. And like I said, Wrigley was my inspiration, and this was really in my wheelhouse.
So that leads me into this question. How much discretion did you personally have in terms of how this was designed, how the field was set up?
Well, during my time leading up to it, during the design stage, which was 2 years before, Pat Sanderon was still here as the head groundskeeper. I was the assistant. And Pat made a lot of decisions about the PAT system. We talked about it, but he made the decision on the PAT system. I was more deeply involved in the setup of the groundskeeping area underneath the stadium. That's where my mark is. Everything that you see when you go down there is exactly how I had designed it for the most part. So operationally, I was more involved in that portion of it, in the design stage. I remember Pat fighting not to have the warehouse here because he didn't want everybody looking down on us, telling us what we're doing wrong on the field. And believe it or not, that did happen after we opened up. I had a couple calls from the front office saying, you're doing this to the field. Yeah, I know. Let us worry about this. You take care of the ball club. But I'm glad we kept the warehouse because it really gives it that signature feel. But yeah, that's the extent of what I had in the design stage of it. And then during the construction stage, I was here for the majority of it.
Same thing. You're down there, people looking out these windows. How much of that criticism did you get? People calling you up?
Yeah, we didn't get into that on opening day. There was too many other distractions that people had to worry about up here in the offices. They were running around like chickens with their heads cut off. I mean, there was so much going on. But certainly during the early part, especially of that first season, we get a handful of phone calls from higher ups in the front office going, "What are you doing out there? You're tearing up the field." Yeah, well, you gotta tear it up to make it look good. They had never seen that at the old ballpark because the offices at the old ballpark didn't face the field. It faced away, looking out into the parking lot of the Memorial Stadium.
Okay, Josh, would you like to switch off? Yep. Yeah.
Did I wear you out?
Well, I want to give him a chance to.
Yeah, I want to turn
Yeah.
it.
Thank you.
All right, so we've talked about the planning a little bit, but could you give kind of a timeline? How early did they approach you about that, or did you approach them? How did that all work?
A planning of
Of the design of you said you took care of the office area down
Yeah.
there and all that.
they were at that point a long ways along for what I was involved with down in our operational area underneath. And I remember them coming into Pat's office at the old ballpark. By this time, all the shell of the ballpark had been designed and everything. And they handed us our first version of what HOK thought was a great groundskeeping area. And Pat and I are standing there looking at it, and Pat looks at it, and he goes, "This isn't any good." And he took the thing and balled it all up and threw it. He said, "Come back with a different idea." So they came back a couple days later with a different idea, and he looks at it, and I'm standing there, and we're both looking at each other going, "This isn't going to work." And he said, "God damn it, can't you guys design a groundskeeping area? Give him the drawing of the shell, and we'll draw it for you." So they handed me the drawing of the shell, and Pat goes, "Take that home tonight, put together what you need, and bring it back in the morning." So I went home that night and drew the whole thing out on the blueprint of the shell, and handed it to them. Pat looked at it and shook his head. I handed it to the guys and said, "This is what we want." And that's exactly how it was built. Now, the only mistake I made, bear in mind, this is 1991. This would have been 1990 because Pat was still a groundskeeper. At that time, there was no females in the groundskeeping industry at all, in the sports fields. So we never gave it a thought about females, in the groundskeeping area. So, because I had the locker rooms and everything set up and all that, and bathrooms, and so that was the one mistake I made in the design, as I never anticipated the females coming in there. Several years after that, I realized I screwed up. I didn't even think of that. Other than that, I feel that what we have down there worked out fantastic, and so that's exactly how it happened. and that's probably not the only time that HOK was told, you don't know what you're doing. We're going to show you how. But that's exactly what happened with the groundskeeping area.
Gotcha. Did you do anything to fix that mistake, or was that after you were gone? And there's somebody
That
else?
was after I was gone. We didn't have our first female on the crew came a couple years before I left, and she was actually working. She was our horticulture specialist because we had gotten flower boxes, flower baskets for the upper deck, and flower boxes planters that we had up on the upper deck to kind of soften the steel and concrete. And so she was under my charge, and but she didn't work games or anything. She was just here for daytime, and that's when I first started realizing I made a mistake, and I don't know what they've done to rectify it.
Well, with designing that whole area, how did that compare to the area you guys had at Memorial Stadium?
Oh my God! Well, see, then that's the difference. The old ballparks, the grounds crew got whatever was left after the stadium was built and open. Well, here's your little hole in the wall, and that's literally what it was. At the old Memorial Stadium, to get out to the field, we walked through this tiny little door that couldn't have been any higher than about like this, maybe 4 feet tall, maybe. And a lot of guys cracked their head on the concrete going out of that. In fact, there was one umpires used to come up. This is before my time, but Pat's told me this story about. There was one umpire who used to come in between innings and have a smoke real quick. And one time he came in, and the break of the inning was ending, and he turns around to run out, and he just leveled himself on the floor, and he's out cold. And the umpires are looking down there. Where is he? And Pat's down there going, "Just go, just get going." And he came out a little later. And our soil room where we kept all of our soil was a dirt floor. Well, this dirt floor didn't see water for 30 years, or however long that dirt floor was there. So, the first job that we did every spring when we came in February at the old ballpark was we would screen all of our soil that we'd need for the year. And there'd be piles of soil down in there, but that floor was super dry, so you could pour water on that floor and it would just bead up on the surface. That's how dry it was. It wouldn't accept the water. And we'd go in there and screen, and we'd come out, we'd be just totally covered in dust from head to foot. And we'd do a couple of days of that at the beginning of each year. So we had quite the luxury here with, a concrete floor for our soil bins, walls for our soil bins, and all that kind of stuff. So we were living in the lap of luxury once we moved here. The window in the office, Pat and I kept telling the architects, who the heck needs to see the field more than the groundskeeper? We're the ones growing the thing. And we argued for that window in the groundskeeper's office. And suddenly you start to see a lot of the new ballparks groundskeepers had windows from their offices. A lot of people thought there was some kind of a special party suite or something, but no, that was just the groundskeeper's office so that we could see what was going on.
Yeah, so no window at Memorial Stadium.
No, we sat on what we called the bus. It was a couple of wooden benches with some folding chairs on it, and we just kind of leaned on the fence like you're hanging out the bus.
So comparing the two stadiums more, with the playing surface itself, how do those differ between Camden and Memorial Stadium?
I remember when we first got here and first started playing a couple games on here, the players started complaining that the infield was too slow. That we weren't cutting the grass as short here as we were cutting it at Memorial Stadium. Well, it wasn't the grass mowing height that was the difference. The difference was we were growing grass on sand versus growing it on native soil. Native soil is more compacted, and because of that, you don't get the density of grass leaves per square foot that you would in sand. With sand, it's more porous, you get more oxygen into the roots, you get more water that gets down there more easily, the fertilizer, everything gets into the root zone more easily so the grass can grow more healthy. And because of that, the density of your shoots of your grass there's more blades per square foot than there are in the native soil field. We were mowing it at the same height here that we were mowing at the old ballpark, but it was much slower because there was obviously more friction from additional blades of grass coming up. And the players were crying about it, and I said, I'm mowing at the same height as it was at Memorial. Well, can you take it any lower? Well, we can, yeah, not a lot lower because this is bluegrass. You can only take it down so low. We were mowing it at I believe 1.125" at the time, and I think we dropped it down to 7/8 was about all I would push it. So we got it down, another 1/4 inch for them. That's about all we could sacrifice and be able to hold it together, especially in its first season.
Did that stop the complaining?
No. No, they just weren't used to a much more healthy turf stand than what we had at Memorial. And thank God, 91 was or 92 was the first season at the ballpark, and that was the year of the eruption of Mount Pinatubo. Now, how does that play into what's going on here in Baltimore? Well, that changed weather patterns around the world because of the volume of dust that was thrown up in the air. And because of that, we had a much cooler summer that year. And that helped in the growing of the playing surface here. It helped us have a little bit easier time getting that grass stand to mature. If it had been a normal growing year here, I mean, it would have been, it's always a struggle here to grow bluegrass. Not as much now because they've really improved the varieties, but back then in the 90s, and the decade of the 90s was very hot years here for Baltimore. So that having that first year being cooler than normal because of that eruption helped us out dramatically.
Wow, that's really interesting. I had no idea there was where was it? Do you know where that?
Mount Pinatubo?
Yeah, where was
I forget where that is. You'll have to look that up in your Funkin' Wagnall.
So,
Oh, they don't have those anymore, do they? Sorry, you'll have to look it up on the internet. Aging myself.
from your eyes, when you see the fan experience, was there a big difference between Camden and Memorial, especially on like a day like opening day?
There was a huge difference between here and Memorial, and it wasn't just for opening day. The greatest part about working here during the time that I worked here from obviously when we opened in 92, and I left here Memorial Day of 2000. And the greatest part about working here all those years was those were the years where we were filling the park up every night. It wasn't until the last year that I was here that we started to see, we had more nights where we weren't selling out. But for the first, 7 years of this ballpark, we sold out pretty much every game. And that's exciting to be anybody involved in the organization, to have that kind of a crowd come every night to watch the games that you're putting on. I don't care if you're, the concessions manager or the groundskeeper or the guys cleaning the stadium or the clubhouse manager or the ball players or the front office. It's exciting when you fill a park up like that every single night.
Right on. I mean, with Memorial Stadium, we've talked about a couple problems you've tried to fix, but are there any more that we haven't touched on, or like what would you say is the biggest problem that you wanted to approach once you got here and just wanted to get on top of
Drainage and everything from the field standpoint was a problem. We had a blue shale warning track at the old ballpark with these massive surface drains. And every time we'd get a huge gully washer, all the water would come rushing down that lower deck onto the track, into those drains, and take a lot of the warning track with it. I don't think anybody really wants to know how much warning track material over the decades went from Memorial Stadium probably down into this inner harbor. And it was one of the reasons that we went in the early years here at Oriole Park with the porous rubber warning track. We didn't have to worry about losing material and have to constantly replace the material. Once it was done raining, you could walk on it and not be sloshing around in the slop. You didn't bring out dignitaries for a pregame after a rain delay, and they're slopping around in this warning track material. So we took that idea from Kansas City Chiefs. They had that same warning track, not Kansas City Chiefs, Kansas City Royals. They had that warning track, and Pat had gone to the ballpark when they were doing their tours of ballparks to see what they liked and didn't like of different ballparks. Pat had gone along to see that one, and he saw it, and he goes, and they took a 1-inch hose and they laid it down on the track, and they opened up, let the water run on it, and water just went right down in there, and it was gone. And Pat said, we want that. Unfortunately, the players complained about the ball bouncing over the outfield fence because it's a rubber warning track, so when it would hit that and take the bounce over, it was an instant automatic ground rule double. So they pulled it out. They pulled it out after I left. I was here, like I said, till middle of the 2000 season. They pulled it out shortly after that. But that was another big change that we wanted to make, and there were several new parks that did the same thing. I don't know if any of them still have it in or not as well, but
Yeah. Did you get to go on any of those stadium tours?
no, I didn't. I was just a schmuck, assistant head groundskeeper at the time. Pat was still in charge. During that part of the design stage and the research stage, Pat was still in charge at that point, so he got to do all that fun stuff.
Okay, so when exactly did you take over as the head ground?
I took over the year before we opened, so I took over in '91. And I always thought to myself, why the hell did Pat leave? I mean, I would think he'd want to open a new ballpark before he retired. And I kind of figured it out that after I went through it, because that last 4 to 6 weeks before we opened, the stress level here in the park was incredible. And not just for me, but for everybody working here. The stress of, is this place going to be ready in time? But like I said earlier, when you'd look out there a month beforehand, you were going, there's no way in hell they're going to have this place ready. But the stress was that thick for that last 4 to 6 weeks, and I thought to myself, I'm not sure Pat would have made it through this, because it was tough, very stressful. So it was a huge relief when we opened that ballpark on opening day. Huge relief.
Yeah.
It's like the monkey off your back.
Yeah. So I heard you talk about it with Mr. Hyman earlier, but the closing ceremonies of Memorial Stadium.
Yeah.
Where you dug up the home plate.
Home plate, yeah.
Can you just tell us that story for the cameras?
Yeah, I remember, when we first started concocting this whole idea, of course, that was all, that whole event was very hush-hush. Nobody was to know about it, but inside the organization, we didn't want any of the plans getting out for what we were going to be doing to close out Old Memorial Stadium. We wanted everything to be a surprise. And I remember they came to say, hey, we want you to dig out home plate, and we're going to take it and drive it down to Oriole Park and plant it all during the ceremony. And I'm thinking to myself, how the hell? That's going to be an awful long ceremony if that's what you're going to do. And then they said, oh, and we need you to dig out home plate in I think it was less than 5 minutes. I can't remember if it was less than 10 or less than 5 minutes, but they want us to do it like that. I go, do you realize how deep that thing is in the ground? So if you look at the old tape of us doing it, it started out, the game ended, and as soon as the players were off the field, the left field gates opened up, and in comes this, big white stretch limousine, and drives down the third base side warning track, and it gets to the dugout and then pulls across the infield grass, stops right between the mound and home plate, and out pop, a bunch of popsicle salesmen. Now, we're all in white tuxes, I believe. I think it was white, maybe it was black, but I thought it was white. And, my guys encircle home plate like a bunch of henchmen. They're all standing there with their arms crossed, dead serious look on their face. They've got sunglasses on like we've got the Secret Service here. The president's going to pop out at any moment. And out pops myself and Rodney Lane, who would eventually become one of my assistants, and Jim, who was a long time old timer on the crew, and we start digging in, and Rodney and I we each got a pick in our hand, and Jim's standing there with a digging bar. He's waiting for us, and we just start hacking away at this clay, and that block for that home plate goes down roughly about 6 to 10 inches, somewhere in that depth, and we're digging through this heavy gumbo clay. And Rodney and I are swinging picks, and I can't believe neither one of us got hit by the other. If you watch it, and I mean, we are busting tail because you can't tell how much time you're taking. They're playing music in the background. I forget the Russian dance that they were playing when we were digging it up, and we finally bust the thing out, and we carry it over to the car. And just to give you an idea how heavy it was, when we put it in the back of the limo, the whole limo just kind of goes, And all my crew got to stay, and then I got in the limo, and I think one or two of my guys also went with me. Maybe all the guys went out. I don't remember now, but we drive out of the stadium, around to the side. We dumped off all my guys. They came back in so that they could watch ceremonies, and I had to ride down here to do the placement of home plate live on camera. That was then fed back to the video board back at Memorial Stadium. So unfortunately, I missed out on the best part of the ceremony with all the old players coming out. But when we come out here, I didn't take that big block because there was no way I was going to be able to hand out my soft. That sucker was heavy because it was so drenched in moisture and everything. It was several layers of 2x wood that the home plate was nailed to. So we had a brand new home plate in there, and we just took a brand new home plate, set it down, and okay, that's the end of the ceremony. So that's what we did. But I really wish I would have been back at the ballpark to see the ceremony. Obviously, I watched it on tape afterwards, but it was pretty special.
Yeah, and how did those closing ceremonies compare to the opening ceremonies here?
Oh, they were two completely different things, and people had such a, rightfully so, people had such a connection to that old ballpark because of all the great Oriole teams, from the past were. That's where they had their big games. That's where they won the World Series so many times, and so I remember the looks on people's faces as all these, watching the video afterwards, of all these old players coming out. When you see Brooksy go out and go to third base and he starts, smoothing out the dirt with his foot. Players have these idiosyncrasies and movements, and it could just be, a shadow of them, and who they are right away just by the way they move and the way they carry themselves. So to see a lot of these old ball players go out and you see their old motions and you see what they do, I mean, it really pulls at the heartstrings of these fans, even the grounds crew, to see all these old players that you watched over the years or that you tended the field for over the years. I only had 6 years of history at that park, but it gripped me. It was just such a fantastic close to that ballpark, and I thought probably one of the best ways to salute the history of that park and the history of those ball players.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's all I have for questions, but is there anything we didn't talk about that you hope to talk about?
Yeah, I'll probably think of them in like an hour and a half from now. Mark, you got anything?
You're not done, Paul.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Josh, I just sent you a few additional thoughts.
Gotcha.
That was great. Thank you.
I did my best.
You guys did a good job.
Thank you. Oh, here it is. I got it. So, did you play a role in choosing the grass variety?
Yes, yep. Pat and I worked on that with the University of Maryland, the people who we consulted with. We had Tom Turner from, I believe he was in horticulture at the university. He was our turf specialist that would come up here all the time and talk with us. And I know we worked with him in choosing the varieties. And they would, our grass was grown over at a sod farm on the Eastern Shore near Salisbury. For the sake, I just can't remember what the name of it was, but the boys there were two brothers, and they did a phenomenal job of raising that sod for us. We kept an eye on it for a year and a half. They contract grew for us, and it was a three-way mix of Midnight, Touchdown, and Eclipse. I remember the varieties that we had in there, and worked pretty well for us. If I had done it over again, I wouldn't have put one of those in there because it was more susceptible to a disease that we commonly get here because of the temperatures that we get and things like that. But again, it's many, many decades later now, and there's much better varieties out there. But yeah, we selected that, and we had that contract going.
Gotcha. And do you remember the day that the sod was laid?
Well, we were the last major league ballpark that laid it the old-fashioned way, which means all the small pieces. Big roll sod was just coming into to play at that point in time. Nowadays you can lay a field in a day and a half, 2 days, and the sod comes in on typically a 4-foot wide roll by anywhere from 50 to 70 feet long, and it's laid with machines, and you can lay it really fast. The company that was hired to build the field hired my crew to help on a lot of the install, and we laid all the sod, and it was all little piece by little piece, and it took us, I want to say it was at least a week, and it was in mid to late November, if I recall correctly, that we laid that. And yeah, so we were the last ballpark where it was done that way. I wish we had been the first to do it the other way. But it is what it was.
Yeah. So on opening day, I mean, we kind of talked about earlier, you said the grass, like how it was green, it didn't really quite pop yet, or?
Oh, opening day it was plenty green by opening day.
Okay. What did
Yeah,
you
but
do to make it that green? You said something about fertilizer earlier?
Well, yeah, fertilizer and iron we were hitting it hard with some quick release fertilizer and iron, but you still got to get soil temperatures up, and so fortunately in that last week or so before opening day, the soil temperatures also came up along with what we were doing, and it all just kind of coalesced about a week beforehand, and everything started jumping. Now we weren't, actual growth, lengthening of the blades wasn't quite there yet, but the greening portion of it had occurred. The chlorophyll production had begun, and we were getting nice and deep green, but we weren't getting a ton of top growth at that point yet. We still needed to get the soil temperatures up a little warmer. Nowadays, a lot of these ballparks, there's sub-air systems in there that can heat the soil and can even cool the soil. We didn't have that back then. Sub-air was actually just coming around right around that time, if I recall.
Gotcha. And so we talked about how opening day kind of felt like a weight lifted off.
Yeah,
With all that
that's
stress
for sure.
leading up. But on the day itself, were you nervous?
Nervous?
Yeah.
No, not at all. I was just too excited, way too excited.
Yeah. And was Pat, the former groundskeeper, was he here on opening day?
I believe it was, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
I can't imagine he would ever want to miss something like that, but he was here.
Yeah, and all the other kind of celebrities, former players, everybody that was here, dignitaries.
Oh yeah.
Were you concerned with all those people on the field right before the game?
No, it wasn't like the All-Star game in 94, 93. That was a nightmare. That was probably one of my worst days.
How so?
Because of it was a combination of things. The All-Star game in 93, we had 10 days in a row leading up to the All-Star game of temperatures of over 100 degrees and nighttime lows not getting below 80 degrees here in the city. And bluegrass does not like that. And the particular disease that I had talked about earlier, summer patch, was rearing its ugly head at that time because of those weather conditions. And so we probably had, maybe 5% damage to the field from that disease going into that All-Star game, and there was nothing I could do about it. We had preventively treated for that summer patch at the proper times earlier in the year. That's the thing about summer patch. You have to treat for it. You have to preventively treat it, because once you see it, it's too late. You can't do anything to fix it. And we were strictly a bluegrass field. I purposely tried to keep ryegrass out of our ball field because we had a lot of issues with Pythium up at the old ballpark, which was a mix of bluegrass and ryegrass. Ryegrass is very susceptible to Pythium, so we decided to try and keep ryegrass out of this field. However, ryegrass can cover your behind with summer patch, because summer patch doesn't attack ryegrass. So, strangely enough, after that event, after the All-Star game, we ended up putting ryegrass, blending it in with the bluegrass to cover up the summer patch damage. But it was a combination of all of that, all that summer patch damage from the really hot temperatures, and the enormous amount of people that were in foul territory. So in the All-Star game, that game is managed by Major League Baseball, not by the Orioles. So I couldn't tell Major League Baseball, no, you're not going to let all those people stand on the foul territory like I do the rest of the season. I have that kind of control the rest of the season, but not for the All-Star game. And there was over 800 VIP passes, and all the damage was actually done the day before. Nowadays, the All-Star week, lasts a whole week. Back then, it was the day before. Everything happened the day before, and then you had the All-Star game the next day. Well, the damage was done to the field the day before, because you had, both teams had their practices, they had the celebrity softball game, they had the home run hitting contest, all these things all at once throughout the entire day from about, I want to say it was started either 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning and went till about 5 o'clock that evening, and then they had the big party down in the Inner Harbor. And, it was 100+ degrees, and you had all these people sitting on the grass and milling about on the grass in the foul territories. Well, when that happens, at that kind of temperatures, you got all those people mashing that grass, you're just crushing those molecules in that grass, and just incredible wear. And it showed up not for the All-Star game, but for the homestand that following week. We had dead grass all behind home plate, and from fungo circle to fungo circle. It just looked terrible. So what we did, as soon as the fans left, as soon as, I think it was the home run hitting contest was the last thing we did that day, if I recall correctly. So as soon as the stands emptied, I had called up to the concessions manager and I said, hey, I need all the ice you got left in this ballpark when you're done. And they gave us what they had left. We sent the truck up to the concourse, and they went to the different stands and got the ice. And as people are leaving the ballpark and walking out, we're down there shoveling ice and flinging it onto the grass, and then pouring water on it to try and lower the temperatures in the root zone to try and help the grass recover a little bit. And it worked pretty good. The grass was pretty turgid the next morning, standing up pretty good, but the damage had been done, and it didn't show up until a couple days after, and then you could really see the death. And it was Pat was still here at that time. So Pat was here for the All-Star game as well. He came to see the All-Star game, and I have a picture of him and he's pointing down to the dead grass around the home plate area. But that was probably I was physically making myself sick that day of all those events. I couldn't even come out of my office. I was sick to my stomach knowing what was going on and what was going to happen, and I had nothing I could do.
Yeah, but no problems like that on opening day.
No, it was all joy.
So we talked a little bit earlier with your collaboration with kind of the players and coaches and stuff, but during the planning stage with the playing conditions, did you have conversations with like managers and players, any coaches about what the field will be like?
No, not really. I mean, I'd already been managing over at Memorial, and we knew what the ball players wanted. And despite what you hear a lot of times, on TV when broadcasters are talking about games, and they say, well, the groundskeeper pitched the foul, the foul line this way or that way to make the ball go foul. Yeah, they did that in the old days, but by that time, in most cases, all the groundskeepers I knew in Major League Baseball, or most of them, we put out a fair field and let the teams fight over it. It was rare when we were doing special manipulation. It did happen, but it wasn't widespread. So there was nothing different. Ideally, what you hope is that when they walk out on this field, it's the same as the field that they walk out when they left Memorial Stadium. It can't be because it's native soil versus a sand-based system, but you're trying to make it as consistent as possible. That's what players look for. They look for consistency.
Yeah, and especially with like a player like Cal Ripken,
Oh yeah, no,
Grace Oriole.
Cal was never shy to give me his opinion. Probably the most analytical guy I've ever met in baseball. But you know what? I learned a hell of a lot from him and his father, and it was because of them that I improved so much more in the maintaining of the infield dirt, which is really where a groundskeeper gets their reputation. It's not from the grass you keep or the mowing patterns that you mow. The players judge you by the infield skin that you keep.
That makes sense. Yeah. And how often did you talk with Cal?
Whenever he decided he needed to talk to me. I was always down at the batting cage during BP in case the players had a concern, but it was rare that you got one.
Yeah, gotcha.
But you have to dial things in, and you need that feedback from the players. But the old saying, no news is good news. That's pretty much the way it was with ball players. If everything was going good, you didn't hear anything from them. It was only when there was a problem that you heard from them.
Gotcha. And going back to opening day pressure, could you just explain more about the pressure you felt, where it came from, and did you also feel any pressure with Pat being here, like your old boss? You've only been doing this for a year.
No. The pressure wasn't on opening day. It was that month leading up to it with, God, are we going to get this done? And I wasn't feeling pressure as much from a playing field standpoint as what was going on in the rest of the ballpark. Excuse me, to make sure that got done.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of the pressure was. And of course, we would get pulled into, the ground crew would get pulled into things that weren't typically our responsibility and pulled away. Don't ask me what. I don't remember, but I do remember getting pulled away at times. And a lot of it also had to do with when Jimmy came back from, Jimmy Tyler, who was the clubhouse manager at the time for the Orioles, and when he came back, the ground crew always helped Jimmy. We always took care of Jimmy, and he always took care of us. And, for him, he's down at spring training for X amount of time, then he needs to come up here and get set up. Now, when you're setting up in a new ballpark, in a new clubhouse, there's a lot more to do. So we helped him with whatever it was that he needed help with.
And with going back to Memorial Stadium, we talked about the challenges a bit, but could you elaborate on just any more challenges from the perspective of the job that you had there?
As far as difference between there and here?
More like just like in general, challenges you face trying to maintain that field, and like you talked about water drainage.
Yeah, I mean, rolling the tarp out at that ballpark was a lot harder than rolling the tarp out here. Here, the field was much more level. It's not totally level, but it was much more level than, an old native soil field. Because water doesn't percolate through it, it runs off of it. You have a steeper surface grade. So you increase the crown on the field. Now the crown on that ball field ran from home plate to center field. It ran the same direction as the football field. So it ran down the center of the football field, and the water shed off in both directions. So when we would roll out the tarp at Memorial Stadium, we were rolling uphill. And because, fans can't see that, and they don't look and they go, well, how hard can that possibly be? Well, come behind it and you'll find out. It's a pretty good uphill climb, and the tarp there was folded one more time than the tarp here. So every time you fold the tarp, you add more drag to the tarp. Because with more folds, you've got more trapped air, you've got more loose fabric in there as you're rolling it out, so that increases drag as you're pushing. So it takes a lot more to push it. And we were using a 10-ounce tarp, which is pretty heavy. It's over a ton when it's dry, and then you're pushing it uphill. So when we moved here, we were able to open it up more because of the way that the side of the stadium was. At Memorial Stadium, it was more of a curve along the wall where the box seats were. Here, it was a little straighter. So we could lengthen that tube and do one less fold. That allowed us to get the tarp out a little easier and a little faster, and we weren't going uphill. I had a 16-year-old kid have a heart attack on that tarp at Memorial Stadium. Unfortunately, he survived, but we lost him twice on the field during that event in a game. So we make it look really easy, but it's not as hard and it's not as easy as you think it is.
Yeah, that's very interesting. But on the flip side, for Memorial Stadium, just like what are its charms, like from a groundskeeper's perspective?
Memorial?
Yes.
When I went there to interview back in September of '84 with Pat, I remember walking into that ballpark, and I was a National League fan. I grew up loving National League baseball. I didn't know diddly squat about the American League. So I remember coming up here, and I remember the whole taxi ride up. This was the year after the Colts had left. And I got an earful from the taxi driver about the Colts leaving and all this stuff. I'm going, what the heck am I walking into? And I get into that park, I get into Memorial Stadium, and the first thing I noticed when I walked into that, walked through the grounds crew door that you had to bend way over to get out, and walked into the opening is, well, there's no roof. There's no sunscreen on the upper deck. I thought, that's odd. This is like a football stadium. This isn't a baseball stadium. That was my first thought about that park. But I grew to love that park. It was an old park by that time, but when you think about it, it's no older than this one is now. But the difference in the care and the upkeep of that stadium versus how Oriole Park has been maintained over the years is night and day. I mean, the park up there was falling apart. It was way outdated, and they didn't quite do the upkeep that we do now with ballparks. But the 6 years I worked there, I loved working there. It was, with all of its faults, it still had a lot of charm. The fans were great, and the fans were right there on the ground crew. Here we're away from all the fans, but the box seats, rung that little area in the left field corner where we were located, and Pat would grow his tomato plants right there, and vines would go up. The tomato vines would go up the wall, and we'd have fans that would start playing with the tomato plants, and I'd go tell Pat somebody's playing with his tomato plants, and he would come out and give them a lecture, or worse. But there was a lot of character at that ballpark, and a lot of fun times, and that's the other thing. I kind of look at that. I got into baseball at the tail end of when baseball was a game, when it was fun, still family owned. And from 85 when I started there till 91, there was a huge change from what baseball became. and I always envied Pat Santarone that he was there when it was fun, when it was really fun. You know, you didn't have all these people running all over the field, marketing people and, you know, media and all that kind of stuff. They stayed back on the warning track, and the field was strictly for the players. There was a lot of fun and practical joking going on, and you know, it was just a great family atmosphere. And that's the way it was when I got there in '85. But by '91, you could see how it had changed to a business, and it was totally different. And you know, of course, it never went back. It just continued to be more and more and more businesslike. And I really envied Pat for that. I wish I could have experienced more of that. But that's the time that I was born and what I got.
Yeah. So you never felt that candid at all?
I mean, we had fun. Don't get me wrong. My crew and I was the first one to instigate it, you know, typically. But my crew, I had a great crew. And, you know, my crew that I had, you know, nowadays, and this changed in the 90s, you know, when I went to turf school back at Wisconsin, I was the only guy who was going into sports turf. Everybody else was going into golf. And that was very typical back then. And I was the first college-educated, turf-educated groundskeeper in Major League Baseball that had a degree in turf. It wasn't until the 90s that we started to see an influx of more college-educated kids in turf coming into baseball. So my crew was made up of all, you know, what we called stadium rats, people that hung around the stadium until you gave them a job because they were always begging you. So these were all inner city guys and kids. And we had a great crew. We worked very hard. We worked long hours, but we had a hell of a lot of fun. And, you know, you were a family. You know, we were working 16-hour days on game days. And you start stringing together 7, 10, 14 days of working those kind of hours. You know, you become family, and you had to have a thick skin because you were going to get picked on. And truthfully, that's probably what I miss the most. Being out of the game now is my crew and the fun we had. That's the fun that I really enjoyed. I did get to obviously keep having that, but there was, you know, in general, that baseball had turned from fun to business because the players changed, of course, and the way the players were being treated and contractually and all that kind of stuff, that changed. And, you know, the front office, that became more and more big business, so that's where it all changed.
Well, a big part of our story is Edward Bennett Williams. Did you ever meet him and have conversations with him?
Yeah, I sure did. I almost got fired probably by him. So it's a Sunday morning. We're having a day game, and Pat Santarone and I are out by the bus, you know, in the seating area, the grounds crew area at the old ballpark, and we're just kind of leaning up on the fence, admiring the field after we'd gotten all done fixing the field up for the game. And I had just watered the infield. And EBW had a habit of just bringing people, you know, he'd bring a large crowd and just go wherever the hell he wanted. And this was early on, after he had just acquired the team. Pat and I are standing there, and we're watching this guy come along the concourse of Memorial Stadium down by home plate with this crowd of people. And he comes to the third base dugout in line with it and starts heading down. And Pat's going, "What's the bleepity bleep is that guy doing?" He couldn't tell from where we were standing that was EBW, and I had never met the guy. And he proceeds to go down and open up the latch to the gate to the field to walk out. And he starts walking out onto the foul territory. And Pat goes, "Go tell that guy to get the hell off the field." So I go marching down. I'm marching down the third base file, and I'm going, hey, get off the plate. And as I'm getting closer, he goes, do you know who I am? I go, nope. He goes, I'm Edward Bennett Williams, and I'll go wherever the hell I want. And I said, well, that's great. You can do that, but don't walk out that infield. I just watered it. And I turned around, I walked back to Pat, and I said, I think I'm going to get fired. He goes, who was it? He goes, that was Edward Bennett Williams. He goes, oh, shit. So he went up later and apologized to him. But so that was my meeting with Edward Bennett Williams.
Well, not fired.
Yeah,
Great.
that was the clean version.
Well, any final thoughts before?
No, I could sit here and tell stories all day.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
And you can look at it for this one. If you had a chance to do it all over, is there anything you would change? One thing you do differently?
Yeah, I don't think so. I really don't. And I don't know if you're talking career, ballpark, or what you're talking, but I would say in every sense of all of those things, I don't think there's anything I'd change. I'm looking in the wrong direction. I'm sorry about that.
I meant for opening day, preparation for it, that whole process.
No, no. It was. I mean, it's when you do it after several years, it's like walking in the sleep. All of our hard work for this ballpark was done the fall before we even opened it. It was putting in the field in the fall, helping the contractor put it in, and discovering mistakes that he made that he had to fix and all that kind of stuff. So